It was on the 17th of September 2021, and Sabina Nessa, a 28-year-old primary school teacher, was out to meet up with friends at the depot bar right by the Kidbrooke commuter rail station to enjoy herself after a long week at work. Although Sabina felt safe in her neighbourhood, she never liked walking in Cater Park, Kidbrooke, after dark. But she didn't have a choice, as she was already behind time. So, as Sabina took a shortcut through the park, Kosi Selimaj, who had spent the whole day planning to intercept a random woman, caught up with her and struck her with a blunt instrument before dragging her into the bushes, where he took her life. Sabina never showed up at the pub, and her friends tried reaching out to her before concluding she probably changed her mind. The following evening, her body was found in a southeast London park near the One Space Community Centre in Cater Park, Kidbrooke Village. Sabina Nessa's death reignited fury over violence against women in the UK, leading to an outpouring of grief.
My sister was funny, lovable, caring. She loved fashion. She was a shopaholic. Very girly girl. So yeah, like wardrobes popping at the seams because there's too many clothes.
Sabina was born north of London in the county of Bedfordshire. She was one of 3 daughters to her parents, Abda Rauf and Azibun Nessa. Sabina's parents originally migrated to England from Bangladesh, hoping to give their growing family a more comfortable life. Azibun Nessa was a full-time mother, while Sabina's father, Abda, worked in a small restaurant serving both Indian and Bangladeshi food. And although this was a busy job for him, Sabina's parents always made sure to make room for plenty of family time. With only 11 months between Sabina and her eldest sister, Jebina, the 2 women were very close and shared a strong bond, which they enjoyed as kids and continued into adulthood. Sabina was focused on what she wanted to be in the future, and never skipped a chance to let the family know that she was hell-bent on becoming a teacher. You see, growing up, the sisters shared a bedroom when they were at primary school, and Sabina would often initiate a play where they would both act as teachers. The girls would take turns playing the pupil and the teacher, and Sabina always took her role play seriously. And because of how much she adored animals, her parents got her a budgie and later a cat. Describing her sister's caring and loving nature, Jebina said that she was the type to look out for her family and friends, and never put her interest ahead of others. Sabina was always there when she was needed, and liked to read the news on her phone, said Jebina. When Jebina married and moved to London, her sister Sabina soon followed, enrolling at Greenwich University in southeast London to study sociology. At this time, she learned her aspiration in life was to teach and, more specifically, towards helping younger children. However, Sabina didn't want to limit herself to the UK. She had aspirations to teach children in Dubai or UAE in the future, and for that, a teaching degree was required. And so, after heading back to the books, she acquired her PGCE teaching degree at the University of Bedfordshire in 2020. Jebina said that Sabina was like the best auntie to her 2 little girls. Her nieces loved and adored her, and looked forward to when she took them shopping. Sabina particularly liked buying shoes and handbags, and she would take the kids out as toddlers and really loved showing them the makeup and clothes she loved. Described by everyone around her as loving and caring, Nessa would raise funds for the impoverished people in Bangladesh, where her parents are from, and the family often visited relatives there. It was a pretty long way from the countryside of Bedfordshire, eastern England, where they all grew up in a rural area. And despite being the only Asian family in their village, the Nessas were warmly accepted in the friendly community. There was a lot of respect between everyone because it's quite a small town where we all know ourselves. We were used to it because we lived there all our lives, and almost everyone who came in contact with Sabina grew fond of her, says Jebina. For a 28-year-old, life couldn't get any better. Just a year after getting her teaching certificate, Sabina landed her dream job teaching 5 to 6-year-olds in a local primary school at Rushy Green Primary School in Catford, about 5 kilometres from her home. She also helped non-English speakers develop their language skills as she taught English as a foreign language. According to her family, colleagues and friends, Nessa was acutely aware of the challenges and discrimination many children faced because she made it her responsibility to learn about oppression and suffering in the world. This was one of the prime reasons she opted to start her career in teaching in a relatively low-income area of London. She was extremely passionate about helping children learn, be ambitious, succeed in life, and break through the barriers of disadvantage. On her way to school, Sabina would often buy flowers and display them in full view of her students so everyone could enjoy them, says Lisa Williams, head teacher at Rushy Green Primary School. Sabina was an early person and would arrive before everyone else, often with the caretaker. She treated the classroom as her home. However, as passionate as Nessa was about her career and teaching other people's children, her sister, Jebina, says she always put family first. One time, she paid for her young nephew to have lunch at school when his parents could barely afford it, so he could eat with the other kids from his class. Sabina had her life in order with her future steps properly laid out, and as a 28-year-old living in London, she had a rich social life, often meeting up with friends around her local area of Greenwich. On the evening of September 17th, 2021, Sabina left her flat to see a couple of her friends at the depot bar by the Kidbrooke commuter rail station. It was a cloudy, dry day, with plenty of sunny spells, and the streets and parks were busy. The area where the schoolteacher had chosen to settle was an affordable neighbourhood in southeast London that attracted young families and professionals, and the gastro pub with the exposed brick walls was the major watering hole in this moderately populated residential area on a former wartime balloon depot site. Her flat, which she shared with a flatmate, was her joy and pride. She often filled it with fresh flowers. One thing Nessa fancied about the neighbourhood was the sprawling Cater Park, which was only a 5-minute walk from her apartment building. Sabina would often walk through the green space in the daytime, admiring the Palladium mansion at the top of the hill and the floral displays. But despite its reputation for being safe, Nessa never walked through the park after sundown because she always felt a bit uneasy as it got dark and the park emptied. But on that Friday evening, however, Nessa was running late to meet up with friends at a pub, so she took a shortcut through the park. But minutes turned to hours, and Sabina hadn't shown up at the meeting, and after adding an extra half an hour on top of that, she was still nowhere to be seen. To add to this, she wasn't replying to text messages or phone calls either. This was very unusual for Sabina, and her friends had no idea what to do. They figured that maybe something had come up and she could no longer make the gathering. So, instead, the evening carried on without her, as there wasn't much cause for concern at this time. But Sabina had every intention to meet her friends. She even left her flat only 8 minutes away to join them. Just that she never made it to her destination, and it never crossed their minds that perhaps something sinister had happened to her. After all, who would expect anything bad to happen in an 8-minute walk in daylight in the middle of England's largest city? But sadly, in reality, these assumptions couldn't have been any further from the truth. The following day, Sabina, a primary school teacher, never showed up for work, and her colleagues were somewhat surprised. The only condition she wouldn't come to school was if she called in sick, but absolutely no one had heard from her. On the evening of that same day, a lone dog walker made his way through Cater Park. The man was said to have been walking on the other side of the path and saw something which, to him, looked like a potato sack in the bushes by the community centre. He crossed over to get a better look, only to discover that someone was covered in leaves. So he got down and tried talking to her, thinking she was drunk and passed out. He brushed the leaves off when she didn't respond, only to discover blood all over the scene. She wasn't having a pulse, neither was she breathing, and it was at this moment he realised he was standing right in the middle of a crime scene. He backed up immediately, dialing 999 shortly before 5:30 p.m. to report the discovery of a body in Cater Park. Police arrived shortly afterward, closing the area to the public to investigate the scene. Tragically, the body was quickly identified as that of Sabina Nessa, and the public was absolutely devastated to hear the news.
Just, brutally murdered. Within, I could see the crime scene from my window, and it was really upsetting. It's really shaken us all and made us feel unsafe.
In the media and at public meetings, a significant number of women questioned why her death was not met with the same media outrage as cases involving white women. Many wondered if it was due to her skin colour, ethnicity, or her being a Muslim woman of Bangladeshi origin.
I just feel there's just been a real lack in response to Sabina, and that's why I decided, that as well, that's why it's important that her name needs to be heard. Like, she lived here, she was breathing, walking in our streets. Why does she not deserve to find her perpetrator as quickly as Sarah Everard's?
I mean, till yesterday, we were all quite disturbed that it is not getting the coverage that it should.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to say it like, it's because she was a woman of color, but I am being forced to say that if it was some other case, there have been cases before Sarah's case, and it got the coverage and everyone knew about it.
With short proximity and length, Sabina should have felt safe walking through a local park. And even worse, the police were adamant that the park was very likely busy over the time she'd lost her life. Despite being so close and in regular contact with her sister, Jebena did not know that Sabina was missing until her body had been found. Her phone would ring on Sunday morning, and she thought it would be Sabina. Instead, her other sister called to tell Jebena that her sister's body was found the previous day. At that stage, the circumstances and cause of her death were unknown. "I was busy with the kids, so my sister had to speak with my husband," Jebena said. "My world immediately fell apart when I heard, and I couldn't possibly have imagined the horror of that call." Along with her husband, Jebena set off for her parental home in Bedfordshire, and all that was on her mind was the death of her sister and how she was going to break the news to her parents. Desperate for information, Jebena did a Google search on her sister's name, only to discover that her body had been found near her home. Immediately she made her husband pull the car over and kept shouting as she expressed shock that was her sister. Needless to say, the entire journey to Bedfordshire was horrendous. She kept searching for more details but really couldn't find much about what may have transpired. A knock at her parents' front door would lead to a world crashing down around them. Sabina's parents were notified of her death by the police. They were told she had lost her life in the most gruesome way. And this is something that no parent should ever have to receive. And what the family was facing now was the road to recovery over something impossible to get over.
Sabina was a beautiful, kind, caring soul. She was kind, caring. She was a quiet, family-orientated person. Nothing's making sense to us. Why was she taken from us? We just don't know. They're inconsolable. There's just no words. No words you can say. It's the worst way for someone to go. Someone else, by the hands of someone else. It's just devastating. She was due to go to see her family at the weekend, and she couldn't even do that one last time.
Jebena says her sister's murder affected her and many other people in ways big and small. She began to worry about leaving the house and whether it was too dark to go out, in case she too was attacked. All through her time of grief, she felt so unsafe taking shortcuts through parks. She got so uncomfortable when men walked behind her. She was literally terrified. She even began to reconsider dropping her 5-year-old daughter off at the breakfast club, where kids go before school when their parents start work early. But it wasn't just the family who was affected by the tragedy. Her students and colleagues have been grieving. Nessa had taught first-year pupils between the ages of 5 and 6 for most of the school day, in almost all subjects, at a school of over 600 pupils and about 70 staff. Lisa Williams, the school's head teacher, said that the way in which Sabina lost her life was particularly difficult to cope with for everyone at the school. After all, she was just going to hang out with friends, doing the kind of normal thing every other person does in their daily routines. "We are devastated by Sabina's tragic death," Lisa said. She was a brilliant teacher, caring, kind, and absolutely dedicated to her pupils. Sabina had so much life ahead of her and a lot more to give, and her loss is very sad. As a school, we'd support each other through this very challenging time and provide specialist support to those who need it. The children also found it somewhat disturbing to hear that one of their favourite teachers had lost her life in a place they associated with fun. Parks are meant to be safe places for kids to play and have fun, but that innocence was soon taken away from them in the moment they heard about Sabina. Lisa pointed out. Another teacher at the school said, "No one and absolutely nothing can prepare you for this. It is awful enough when someone dies, but this is so much worse. It is even impossible to comprehend that she suffered in the most violent way. Just on Friday we were sitting beside her, and now this." Everyone loved her, including the Year 2 pupils and their parents. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, also reacted to the spate of killings, calling it an epidemic.
My thoughts and prayers are with Sabina Nessa's family. It's just awful what happened to Sabina last Friday. When I think of Bieber Henry, Nicole Smallman, Sarah Everard, it's heartbreaking.
Meanwhile, hundreds of people gathered for a candlelit vigil for Sabina Nessa a week after she lost her life. The special ceremony in remembrance of the primary school teacher was held in Pegler Square, Kidbrooke, and those who couldn't attend were encouraged to hold a candle at their doorstep at about the same time. Sabina Nessa's family held each other's hand as they made their way to the front to address everyone that turned up for the vigil. Her sister, Jebina, somehow summoned the courage to speak to the crowd.
My parents have lost their daughter, and my girls have lost such a brilliant, loving, caring auntie who dearly loved her. Words cannot describe how we are feeling. This feels like we are stuck in a bad dream and can't get out of it. Our world is shattered. We have simply lost for words. No family should go through what we are going through.
As the nation mourned the loss of Sabina Nessa, investigators were still searching for the perpetrator of the crime. They combed the crime scenes for anything left over from which they could get a DNA match, but there was nothing. The force even called on members of the public to come forward if they had a piece of information that could be of help in nabbing the attacker. This obviously included asking people to share surveillance and dashcam footage from all cameras in their local area. All of this footage was thoroughly searched, and their efforts were worthwhile, as shortly after this, the police found some rather concerning details. They found surveillance footage of a man who was seen walking out of the park in Pegler Square in Kidbrooke around the suspected time of the assault. In this footage, the man is seen holding an unknown object in his hand while suspiciously looking around. He then takes a good look behind him, puts up his hood, and disappears from view. The suspect had come from a nearby street, and from that street, the police were able to identify he came from a Nissan Micra, and not long after this, on another camera, the same car is spotted driving away from the area he was walking towards. It was therefore suspected that this car belonged to the man. Before this footage was released to the public, the police had actually arrested 2 other men in connection with Sabina's murder. These unnamed individuals were 38 and 41 years old. However, in both of these cases, there was a very distinct lack of evidence of their involvement, and both of them were released. But this surveillance footage was a great lead for investigators, as it placed a suspect and his face in the exact area where Sabina's body was discovered. But the challenge was to find the car coming and going. So, on the 24th of September, 7 days after her incident, the police released the surveillance footage to the public, hoping someone would identify the suspect. Speculations began to circulate, and the authorities received several anonymous tips from the public. While most of them led to a dead end, a few of them led the cops to a man identified as Kosi Selimaj, a 36-year-old pizza delivery driver and garage attendant from Albania. Living in Eastbourne, located on the south coast of England, Kosi lived 65 miles away from where Sabina was found. So, why could he have been in Kidbrooke that Friday evening? Experts' analysis confirmed that the surveillance footage did appear to be Kosi Selimaj, and following this information, he was tracked down to a small flat and arrested. When taken in for questioning, Selimaj refused to respond to questions, which is never a good sign. However, with the surmounting evidence against him, police had more than enough to charge him, and Kosi Selimaj was eventually charged with the murder of Sabina. The Home Office said at the time he committed the crime, Kosi had the right to be in the United Kingdom, but officials have refused to give details. However, details emerged that he entered illegally into the UK in 2015, arriving on a lorry after living in Greece for some years. Soon, investigators were able to piece together his movement in the days before the crime. On September 17th, the same day Sabina disappeared, Kosi Selimaj booked himself into a room at the 5-star Grand Hotel in Eastbourne, which is only 5 minutes away from where he lived. It was one of the best rooms, costing between £300 to £400 per night. The staff here knew Selimaj, and they knew he lived nearby, and this was for one simple reason. His recently estranged ex-wife, Yonela Gergeson, was working in the hotel. While waiting for his wife to appear, Kosi became argumentative at the check-in desk, and staff called 101, but no officer was sent. Yonela was concerned over his strange behaviour, and because she wanted to reason with the man, she agreed to talk to him in his car. And this is where his main motive for booking the room became clear. She was understandably nervous while with him, as one of the primary reasons for the separation was due to his violence. In fact, Selimaj had choked Yonela several times in the weeks leading up to the separation. One time, he came home one day and tried to strangle his estranged wife because she had missed his phone calls while working a double shift. He later snapped out of it and let her go, but didn't apologize for his actions. Yonela noticed he was impatient and very anxious, which was pretty strange because she hadn't seen him like that before. He had a bottle of alcohol with him, but he wasn't drunk. The pair then had limited contact until the day of the incident, when Kosi arranged to meet with her in his car. All the same, she wasn't going to let him intimidate her. Instead, she tried to reason with him. But this didn't go very well, and midway through the conversation, Selimaj moved to the back seat of his car and suggested to his ex-wife that they have sex. Yonela was dumbfounded that he would even suggest something like that, and turned him down. She would leave him in the back seat of his car alone as Kosi remained there, angry and frustrated for some time. Eventually moving into the driver's seat, he raced through the car park and exited, disappearing into the day. He never returned to the hotel, nor did he return home. Instead, he would make a 65-mile journey to London, where he then hopes to disappear into the streets to find a woman to sleep with, and he was ready to achieve this by any means necessary. He drove all the way from the Eastbourne area to southeast London. He ended up in Kidbrooke, where he then parked his car and entered a local Sainsbury's supermarket. Surveillance cameras captured him browsing the home section, where he eventually bought a rolling pin using his credit card before returning to his car. Police believe Kosi was looking for a potential weapon to carry out the act. His next decision was critical, yet deeply flawed. Selimaj had to weigh up what to do next: calm down and process emotions, or take his anger out on an innocent bystander, and he chose the latter. He swapped the rolling pin for an emergency traffic triangle before exiting the vehicle and taking to the streets. As he made his way to Kidbrooke, surveillance footage captured his moments as he looked to his right. Selimaj spotted Sabina, who at this time was making her way into Cater Park as she was billed to meet up with some friends at a pub. Taking his opportunity, Selimaj put up his hood and followed Sabina into the park. He trailed behind along the park's path for a short while, picking up his pace in the process. After looking sideways to ensure no one was around or watching, he broke into a run to catch up with her. At this time, Nessa knew something was up as she turned to face her assailant, but before she could get a good look at him, he struck her with a metal traffic triangle. According to medical reports, Sabina had suffered severe head injuries after her attacker struck her 34 times. As Sabina lay unconscious, Kosi dragged her into a nearby underbrush, removed her tights and underwear, and took her life with his hands to her throat. Following his actions, Kosi covered Sabina's body with several branches, returned to the park bench where he picked up the many pieces of the shattered traffic triangle, and then disappeared into the night, leaving her body to be found the very next day. After returning to his car, he calmly drove off, never to return to Greenwich again. Kosi knew that driving with a traffic triangle in his possession could implicate him, so halfway back home, he stopped in Tunbridge Wells in Kent and threw it into the River Tees in hopes that it would be lost forever. After dumping the exhibit, Kosi carried on with his journey, arriving back at the Grand Hotel in Eastbourne at just past midnight. The surveillance camera again captured him heading through the lobby to his room. The following day, he went back to his job and carried on with his life as if nothing had happened. That would, of course, be until the police finally came knocking on his door. Amongst the pain and confusion, autopsies would come back inconclusive about the cause of her death, but between the brutal force and manhandling, we can likely assume this to be either. Although the attack was premeditated, the person Kosi exacted his rage upon was completely random, which is a terrifying detail, as this is a completely unpreventable circumstance. Unfortunately, Sabina Nessa was the first lone woman to cross his hell-bent path, and she just didn't stand a chance after that point. The attack was concluded to be sexually motivated, but there was actually no evidence of penetrative assaults, only the removal of clothes from the victim before eventually taking her life. And this makes one wonder what exactly his motive was. Was it an act of pleasure or violence? Or was he simply playing God? Or could it have been a result of the built-in annoyance after his encounter with his ex-wife earlier in the day? Despite his confession, Selimaj initially pleaded not guilty to the murder of Sabina, but he did admit that he was responsible for Sabina's death, and it really didn't make any sense. The Albanian was held in prison until February of 2022, when he was then due to appear at the Old Bailey in London for a pre-sentencing hearing, and while here, he would have to face Sabina's family. As with most spineless killers, Selimaj opted to stay in his cell instead of showing up to his hearing, although he did simultaneously change his plea from not guilty to guilty. Sabina's family was terribly enraged and furious that the coward wouldn't show his face or own up to his crimes.
Horrible animal, vile animal he is. And I was just angry, upset, and the fact that he wouldn't answer any questions as well. It's broken us. Getting that phone call saying that she's not here anymore just was like the worst case, like a bad dream.
As a result of his guilty plea, Kosi was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum sentence of 36 years behind bars. Kosi committed a predatory and savage attack on a young woman who would have felt safe in her own environment.
Anybody has the right to go out and go wherever they want at whatever time of day they want. And it's unfortunate that as she was running late for a meal in a restaurant with her friend, that she decided to cut through the park, and I'm afraid that is probably the reason why she was targeted.
The terrifying part about this case is the lack of chance Sabina was given. She had no way of keeping herself safe from the situation, and it makes one wonder, if no woman can walk 10 minutes without feeling safe from psychopaths like this, how then can anyone else feel safe? Sabina's family and friends ultimately remember her as beautiful, caring, and talented. She continues to inspire them to always put themselves first and never let anybody put them down. Throughout all the vigils and love for Sabina Nessa, it's clear to see that she has left a huge hole in her community. She had so much life ahead of her, with plans that would now forever remain unfulfilled. Tragically, in an act of pure randomness, her entire life was cut short by the fickle and temporary rage of an evil man. Please visit our online video course that will teach you everything you need to know about self-defense. 50% of all sales will be donated to a women's charity that combats domestic violence. Link to the program is in the description below.